And now, your host for this evening.
Thanks, John. The Beatles started recording music together going as far back as the late 50s under the Quarrymen name. For a band that's been around as long as the Beatles have been, and for how massive of a presence they have in pop culture, also with how many TV shows, TV appearances, songs, albums, video games, board games, all these pieces of media that the Beatles have been associated with, it's almost guaranteed that there are bound to be some pieces of Beatles media that are lost. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. Not only lost media, but also unreleased, canceled, and even some found Beatles media. I'm a huge fan of lost media videos on YouTube, and I'm a huge fan of the Beatles, obviously. I feel like it's really fun to take two of my interests and combine them for this video. But before we get into it, a huge amount of research for this video was done with information I compiled from the Lost Media Wiki and the Beatles Bible website. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the authors on those pages whose articles helped me do most of the research for this video. So with that being said, I think it's time to talk about our first piece of lost Beatles media. And the first piece of lost media we are going to be taking a look at is the Beatles on People and Places. Alright, when did the Beatles make their first television appearance? Go! If you said February 9th, 1964 on the Ed Sullivan Show, you'd be correct. For the United States. But the Beatles actually made their television debut on October 17th, 1962 on Granada TV's regional program entitled People and Places. What even was People and Places? Well, it was a topical magazine program that had different segments covering different topics. The show was filmed in Manchester and it only aired in the northern parts of England. The Beatles had multiple appearances on People and Places, all of which are deemed lost. So all in all, the Beatles made 4 appearances on People and Places. The first being on October 17th, 1962, where they performed Some Other Guy and Love Me Do. Their second appearance was on November 2nd, 1962, where they performed A Taste of Honey and yet again Love Me Do. Their third performance was on December 17th, 1962, where they performed Twist and Shout and yet again Love Me Do. And their final appearance took place on January 16th, 1963, where we have no idea what songs they performed, but the speculation is that they probably played Love Me Do as their second song just like the other performances. As of now, these are the only things that we have from the Beatles performances on People and Places. We have a few photos, one of the band on set. There's one that's a close-up of Paul McCartney that looks very eerie to me. I don't know why, it's just kind of creepy. And there are also a few other photos. There's also talks of possible footage existing with Paul and John with Ringo in the back. I couldn't find anything on that anywhere. I don't think that really exists. Well, as of right now, the footage of their performances on People and Places is completely lost. What makes this whole entry partially lost is that some of the audio has allegedly been found. In 2021, a YouTube channel by the name of the Beatles Rare Sessions uploaded the full performance of Love Me Do from their first appearance on People and Places, this being the October 17th, 1962 appearance. As well as in 2019, another channel by the name of Tiago Iglesias uploaded partial versions of Some Other Guy, A Taste of Honey, Love Me Do, and Twist and Shout. Take it up, baby, now. Take it up, baby. Twist that shout. Twist that shout. Now, how is the audio for these performances even found if the footage is nowhere to be found? This explanation comes from the description of Tiago's video of the partial versions of these songs. It states, "This just in from Mark Ashworth, a Friday night treat for you all. The audio of the Beatles' appearances on Granada TV's People and Places were recorded by Adrian Killen, a 16-year-old from Kirkdale, on a reel-to-reel tape deck wired to the TV speaker. It sold at auction and was purchased by Apple in the 90s. Now, the authenticity of whether or not these are the actual audio versions of the performances on the Beatles on People and Places is something I see contested in the YouTube comments of these videos. Some people believe that they actually are, some people believe that they're not. As for me, I want to believe that these actually are the performances and they're not just completely lost, but there really is no way for us, the general public, to 100% know. The only way we would 100% know is if Apple does have this somewhere in their vaults and release it at some point in time. Wouldn't Anthology 4 just have been the perfect time and place to release something like this, assuming they still exist? But if Apple does own these audio recordings, I don't think they have any plans to release them. So we may or may not have some audio from this, but the footage is considered completely lost. The next piece of Beatles lost media we're going to be talking about is very similar to the last one, and it's the Beatles' performance of She Loves You on CNET 630. Sometime in January of 1963, the TV show People and Places that we just talked about was succeeded by the TV show CNET 630. From all the information I could find, there isn't much readily available. I'm pretty sure CNET 630 and People and Places was pretty much the same show. They just decided to change the name. Anyways, on October 14th, 1963, the Beatles went back to Granada TV studios in Manchester to record 2 songs that would later air on CNET 630. Those songs were She Loves You and Twist and Shout. Now, the performance of Twist and Shout would air the same night it was recorded, but the performance of She Loves You would air the following Monday. Right now, you can find the performance of Twist and Shout from CNET 630 on YouTube, but the performance of She Loves You is completely missing. The only thing on the Lost Media Wiki entry for this topic that I can find is this picture that claims it's from the She Loves You recording. What we do know is that the video and audio from the She Loves You performance is is completely gone. Here's my theory on it. Most likely this is the case with both the People and Places performances and the Scene at 6:30 She Loves You performance. I'm not a Doctor Who fan, but I am a Lost Media fan, and I know that the Doctor Who earliest episodes were taped over by the BBC. They reused and re-recorded over tapes in that time. I think it was just a general practice. There wasn't a big emphasis on preserving any sort of media and creating a library at that time. So what I'm guessing happened is that with the Scene at 6:30 She Loves You performance, as well as the People and Places performances, the tapes that were used to record those, I'm guessing was recorded over with something else. I know this wasn't the BBC that recorded these, but I'm guessing it was just a general practice in TV at that time. So if I had to guess what happened to these performances, that would be my guess, and that would mean that they're essentially completely gone forever. Our next piece of lost media is a lost song written and recorded by Paul McCartney titled Etcetera. On August 20th, 1968, during a recording session for the Beatles' White Album, Paul McCartney recorded a demo for a song that's now known as Etcetera. The song was recorded during the same session that produced White Album songs Mother Nature's Son and Wild Honey Pie. I had such a hard time saying Mother Nature's Son. Mother Nature's Son. McCartney recorded a take of the song while waiting for session musicians to arrive, and after recording and playing the demo back, the tape was taken away by George Martin's assistant Chris Thomas. The song is said to have lyrics, a bridge, and an intro that is very reminiscent to the one of Here, There, and Everywhere. In Many Years From Now, which is Paul McCartney's authorized biography that was published in 1997, McCartney recalls that the song was written with the intention to be given to Marianne Faithfull for her to record, but she, as well as the rest of the Beatles, passed on recording the song. The music was later adapted and given to the Black Dyke Mills Band, whose altered version of the song was an instrumental titled Thingumabob. Is it Thingumabob? Thingumabob? Thingumabob. Thingumabob. Thingumy... Whatever. Thingumabob. This song was released as a side A on the Beatles' new label at the time, Apple. Paul McCartney himself is not a big fan of this song. He stated before that it's, quote, a bad song, and that he, quote, is glad that it died in a tape bin. Which him saying that he's glad it died in a tape bin makes me think that the song was discarded in that way, or it makes it sound like the song was thrown away or the tape for the demo was thrown away, destroyed, anything you want to say. But it seems that the quality of this song might just be McCartney and the other people who passed on recording its opinion, because EMI engineer Alan Brown, who was there when the song was being recorded, recalls that the song is, quote, a very beautiful song in Mark Lewison's 1988 book, The Complete Beatles Recording Sessions. In that same book, Brown is quoted as saying that the song was a ballad and has the word etc. several times in the lyric. I only heard it twice, when McCartney recorded it and when we played it back to him. The tape was taken away and I've never heard it since. So what's the status of the Etcetera demo tape? Well, music critic Richie Utenberger wrote on his website that EMI engineer Alan Brown claims that the tape is no longer in the EMI vaults, but a copy of the demo tape resurfaced in Paul McCartney's personal collection sometime in the early 21st century. In my opinion, this is all hearsay. This doesn't confirm that the demo tape still exists. If anyone does have the seemingly sole copy of the Etcetera demo tape, it would be Paul McCartney. However, he's gone on record several times stating his distaste for this song. So even if he does have it, I don't think this will ever see the light of day or be released in any way. And I put this in the lost category instead of the unreleased category because we don't 100% know that this tape even exists anymore. Unlike some of the unreleased things I'm going to be talking about a little later in this video, we know that those exist, we know where they are, they're just unreleased. We really have no idea where this demo tape is. Now let's get into a couple of Beatles projects that were canceled. The first one we're going to be talking about, I so badly wish myself that it could have been made. I so badly wish that we could have got this, and I'm talking about the 2012 Yellow Submarine CGI 3D remake. If you're watching this video, I am 100% sure that you probably already are aware of the 1968 animated movie Yellow Submarine. But did you know that there were plans to remake the movie in the early 2010s? In 2009, Disney, Apple Corps, and Image Movers Digital announced a motion capture remake of the Beatles movie Yellow Submarine. This was announced at Disney's official fan expo, the D23 Expo. The film was aiming for a summer of 2012 release to coincide with the 2012 Summer Olympics in London. Robert Zemeckis, who was the director of all three Back to the Future movies, Castaway, Polar Express, Forrest Gump, and the 2009 remake of A Christmas Carol, which is very relevant to this story, he would have wrote and directed this remake of Yellow Submarine. This movie got so far into development that we actually know that people were casted to voice characters in this movie. So we know who would have voiced all four Beatles. Peter Serafinowicz would have voiced Paul McCartney. Dean Lennox Kelly would have voiced John Lennon. Carrie Elwes, I hope I'm saying that right, would have voiced George Harrison. And Adam Campbell would have voiced Ringo Starr. There are also rumors that David Tennant would have voiced the Chief Blue Meanie. Also, the Beatles cover band the Fab Four were slated to do the motion capture for each Beatle in the movie. There were pretty high expectations for this film internally. I mean, how could this go wrong? Disney, Beatles, animation. I mean, who better than Disney to make a CGI motion capture remake of Yellow Submarine, especially after they used the same technology that they would be using in this movie in 2009's A Christmas Carol with the same director? To play up even more how high expectations were internally for this film, there are rumors that if the film had done good, it would not only be adapted into a Broadway musical, but also a Circus du Soleil show. However, the reason this Beatles Yellow Submarine remake was never made can almost entirely be blamed on one shitty movie. In May of 2010, Disney shut down Image Movers Digital, which was the studio that would have produced this Yellow Submarine remake after A Christmas Carol didn't do as well as they had hoped. But Disney themselves didn't cancel the Yellow Submarine remake until 2011 when the movie Mars Needs Moms completely bombed at the box office. So this stupid movie could ultimately be the reason that we never got the Yellow Submarine remake. I was 9 years old when Mars Needs Moms came out, and I remember thinking it was stupid back then. I never actually watched it. I do just remember the trailers and the commercials playing in theaters or on TV. I never saw it though. I remember thinking it was stupid. And if this movie ultimately is the reason because it bombed so bad that Disney was like, we're not going to touch any motion capture CGI anymore, and we didn't get a remake of this Beatles movie, that makes me hate Mars Needs Moms even more without even having to watch it. Honestly, I completely forgot that this movie existed until I researched this video. I think it's known as one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. However, Disney themselves canceling the project isn't the end for this Yellow Submarine remake. Disney let Zemeckis take the project to other studios to see if it would get picked up, which that led to the final creation that Image Movers Digital would ever work on, the look dev test for Yellow Submarine. By the year 2012, Zemeckis basically had lost interest in remaking the movie. I mean, this was the year it was supposed to come out. It was supposed to come out with the Summer Olympics. That had come and gone. Zemeckis stated his lack of interest remaking the film in an interview, stating, quote, "That would have been a great one to bring the Beatles back to life. But it's probably better not to be remade. You're always behind the 8 ball when you do a remake. It gets harder and harder to make movies." With the current state of the industry, it's difficult to stay passionate about it. The hardest thing for a filmmaker as he's aging is saying, how much more of this crap can I take? It's tough. I can only do it if I have a script to believe in, like Flight. Some concept art as well as a few animation tests are available online, as well as this very short clip.
What's the matter, John, love? Blue meanies?
Newer and bluer meanings have been sighted in the vicinity of this theatre. There's only one way to go out.
How's that?
Singing!
But the finished look development tests have never been available to the public. I wish so badly that this movie would have been made. I absolutely love the look of it. I know some people would have hated it no matter what because it's not the original, but I feel like the original would still exist, so even if this movie ultimately did suck, the original would still exist. But assuming it didn't suck, could you imagine how amazing this would have been? To see the Beatles completely reanimated in a new way. Just from that little small clip that we do have, I think this movie just would have been so much fun. I could totally see this just being a complete comfort movie for me. I just think this animation style is perfect for the Beatles. We weren't super close to getting the movie, but we also weren't super far away. Disney announced the movie, it was in the works, it just probably didn't get very far. But I feel like if A Christmas Carol and Mars Needs Moms didn't do so bad, this movie would have been made. And I know some people would have hated it just because it's a remake, but not saying it would have been good or not. I just think it would have been fun to have the option to watch it. Especially in 3D, man. Could you imagine going to the theater and seeing this movie in 3D? I may be the only one, but I think I would have absolutely loved it. Our next entry is also a canceled Beatles film, but for this one we have to go a little farther back than 2009. We have to go all the way back to 1968. This is the story of the canceled Beatles documentary, The Long and Winding Road. Neil Aspinall did a plethora of things from the Beatles, whether it was starting out as their first road manager all the way to being a chief executive for Apple Corps. He was really involved with all aspects of the Beatles. In the late 60s, Aspinall came up with the concept for a documentary about the Beatles. The original concept for the documentary was to be the first official account of the band's career. The story of the Beatles was going to be told through the band themselves using archival footage and new interviews. Does that sound familiar to anybody? The earliest trace of this project go back to 1968 when the head of Apple Films, Dennis O'Dell, started reaching out to TV stations, newsreel, and film companies to get any footage he could of the Beatles. And in that same year, 1968, the Beatles had an official biography published about them written by author Hunter Davies. The Beatles themselves were reportedly not very happy with the final product of this biography. That's what made them turn their attention to this project, The Long and Winding Road, to be able to release their own version of their story. Work on the film continued into the year 1970. In February of 1970, the New York Times reported on not only the new upcoming Beatles film Let It Be, which is now available on Disney+. That wasn't an ad, I'm not being paid by Disney, that really sounded like an ad. But they also reported on an upcoming biographical documentary entitled The Long and Winding Road. although now we know that the year 1970 was not a very good year for the Beatles as a group. As on April 10th, 1970, Paul McCartney would officially announce that he was leaving the Beatles. McCartney leaving the group and the band breaking up wouldn't really affect any production on the film whatsoever at this time. Aspinall would work with researcher Neil Burleigh and continue to work on this film throughout the year of 1970. They would eventually produce a rough work print of the film, and Apple would continue to promote the movie. Apple stated that the documentary would be shown in a split-screen format that would mirror that of the Woodstock documentary that was released around this time. Apple also stated that the film would be in theaters by Christmas of 1970. Even as late as October of 1970, it seemed like the Christmas release date was still the plan, because in that month's edition of the Beatles' official fan magazine, Beatles Book Monthly, they reported that Aspinall was close to finishing the film and reiterated the Christmas Day release date. However, once again, we do know that 1970 wasn't the best year for these four guys as a group, as Christmas that year would come and go without the film being released due to it being halted because of the Beatles' ongoing legal battles between themselves. McCartney reportedly stated in court around this time that he would have no further involvement in this project. This is what led Aspinall to have to shelf the project at the very minimum until all of the Beatles' legal problems were settled. By 1972, Apple had announced that production on the film had resumed, and John Lennon himself mentioned the making of the film on a 1974 appearance on The Today Show.
And there's a film in the offing that's comprised of all films we've collected from all the tours and all the interviews over the world that has been put together, which will be called The Long and Winding Road, no doubt.
It's also stated that around this time the name of the film had changed from The Long and Winding Road to 10 Years in the Life of the Beatles. That's just an absolutely terrible name. That sounds like one of those Beatles documentaries that is all just public domain footage. The Long and Winding Road is really a perfect name for a documentary about the Beatles as a band. Nonetheless, work on the film would continue all throughout the 1970s. In the late 70s, when Eric Idle was producing his 1978 movie The Ruddles' All You Need Is Cash, which was a parody of the Beatles, George Harrison was not only a friend of Eric Idle, but he also played a part in the Beatles parody movie. George lent a videotape copy of the rough print of Aspinall's work to Idle so he could research the Beatles for his own parody movie. Scenes from the Ruddles film mirrored Deso Hoffman's 8mm movies of the Beatles from 1963, so we can assume that that footage was used in the Long and Winding Road rough print, because I've read that Deso Hoffman's 8mm movies weren't available to the public until sometime in the 1980s. Okay, this next set of information and quotes I couldn't trace back to anywhere. I couldn't specifically trace the quotes back to anywhere. I do believe them to be true, but for this next part, just take these quotes with a grain of salt because I can't 100% prove that they're true. But we're just gonna go with it because it goes with the story. Again, take this with a grain of salt. It seemed as though the documentary was still just continuing to be produced all throughout the 1970s. In 1976, a new show opened on Broadway titled Beatlemania. It used all of the Beatles' music without the Beatles' permission. What does this have to do with the Long and Winding Road documentary? Well, the Beatles obviously weren't happy that their music was being used on Broadway without their permission, so of course there were legal proceedings that came with that. Now this is where I couldn't find the direct source of this quote. On November 28th, 1980, John Lennon wrote this legal statement during the Broadway musical Beatlemania legal discourse. I and the other three former Beatles have plans to stage a reunion concert, an event to be filmed and included as the finale to The Long and Winding Road, the official Beatles produced documentary that is to be released in the mid-1980s. Again, I tried to find this quote, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything about John Lennon mentioning the Beatles Mania Broadway show. Why is this relevant? Well, not only does it prove that the Beatles may have reunited in the 1980s, let's just throw that aside, it also proved that the film was still going ahead and was planned to be made and released. But the reason why the film was ultimately canceled was 10 days after John Lennon allegedly made this statement, he was tragically murdered, and that would put any release on The Long and Winding Road on hold indefinitely. And if you're curious, yes, Apple Corps won the lawsuit against the Beatlemania Broadway show, so that's why I feel like there might be validity behind this quote. I just couldn't exactly find where it was from, because there were legal proceedings between Apple and the Beatlemania Broadway show. It wasn't until 1992 when the Beatles started working on the Anthology project, which the Anthology documentary was basically just a rebooted version of the Long and Winding Road documentary. It was the exact same concept. They just decided to completely start from scratch with it. As for Neil Aspinall's work print of the film, I'm going to read this directly because I want to make sure I get it right. In 2015, bootleg label HMC released via their TMOQ Gazette series a DVD of what appeared to be a videotape copy of Neil Aspinall's work print. This version of the film was compiled using existing archival footage with no new interviews, no narration, no opening or closing credits. Instead, the closing credits for the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour film were used as a placeholder, but this bootleg version did have the split screen effects that were mentioned in interviews about the original film. But other than that, whether or not this is real, I guess is up for your interpretation. It's also unknown if there are any other versions of this film that were completed in any way, other than just Neil Aspinall's work print. Like, if the project was still being worked on into the year 1980, I'm sure there has to be something out there somewhere. Of course, if Apple happens to own any versions of this film, it'll probably never be released with Anthology taking over. So I just think if there is anything from The Long and Winding Road, we are most likely never going to see it. And I'm completely unsure if that 2015 release has anything to do with Neil Aspinall's work print. Before we talk about our last piece, which is actually a found piece of Beatles media, I want to very briefly talk about two pieces of unreleased Beatles media. These were originally going to be entries in this video, but I decided to take them out not only just for time, but also because these are two of the most popular unreleased Beatles topics. There are already a lot of really good videos on YouTube about these topics. I did just want to briefly mention them, but I didn't want to go super in depth as a complete entry. I'm of course talking about Carnival of Light and the 27-minute version of Helter Skelter. So very briefly, what is Carnival of Light? Well, Carnival of Light is an unreleased Beatles song that was recorded on January 5th, 1967. It was recorded for the Million Volt Light and Sound Rave that was held in London on January 28th and February 4th of that same year. The song is said to be 13 minutes and 48 seconds in length, and besides the 2 days that it was played at that rave, it has never been heard by the general public or released in any way. It is said to be a very experimental song. Several people have heard the song after 1967. Like in 1987, when previously mentioned Beatles expert Mark Lewison was allowed to listen to the song. He was allowed to listen to it while writing his previously mentioned book, The Complete Beatles Recording Sessions. Mark has been quoted by saying the song includes, quote, distorted hypnotic drum and organ sounds, a distorted lead guitar, the sound of a church organ, various effects, water gargling was one, and perhaps most intimidating of all, John Lennon and Paul McCartney screaming dementedly and bawling out loud random phrases like "Are you alright?" and "Barcelona." Now, Paul McCartney actually tried to have the song released in 1996 as part of Anthology 2, but George Harrison vetoed it. He didn't like the song, stating that he, quote, didn't like avant-garde music. And as a result, the track never made it to the album. It's not just up to McCartney on his own to decide whether or not to release this. He would also need the permission of not only Ringo Starr, but also the estates of John and George. As of now, 2025, there are no plans to release this song. We do know exactly where it is. We do know that Paul McCartney is in possession of it, and he really does want it to be released. So I just think that it's a matter of time before it's released. I feel like every Beatles fan is kind of looking for a place for them to release this song. But it's just up to the estates and Ringo at this point, so I think that eventually we will get it. It's just a matter of time, in my opinion. There are also a lot of videos that go super in depth into this song if you're interested. I really like the one by Vinyl Rewind. I think he's one of the most underrated music channels on YouTube. He puts so much effort and production into all of his videos. I've watched him for years. So if you're interested in more Carnival of Light, I would recommend watching Vinyl Rewind's Carnival of Light video. Also, his Paul's Dead video is great. The other unreleased entry that I'm going to be talking about is the 27-minute version of Helter Skelter. On July 18th, 1968, the Beatles recorded 3 takes of Helter Skelter. Take 1 ran for 10 minutes and 40 seconds, Take 2 ran for 12 minutes and 35 seconds, and Take 3 ran for 27 minutes and 11 seconds. On Anthology 3, they released an edited version of the 12-minute 35-second Take 2 of Helter Skelter, and it was only 4.5 minutes. It abruptly just fades out, but it gives us a look into what the 27-minute version might sound like. It didn't sound like Helter Skelter that we know off of the White Album. It was a much slower version of the song, and eventually the full 12-minute 35 version Take 2 would be released on the White Album Super Deluxe. And the author Mark Lewison, the Beatles expert, also expressed that he tried to get George Martin to release the 27-minute version on Anthology 3 in the 90s. There's a big quote, but I'm just going to sum it up. Basically, George Martin didn't think anybody would really be interested in the 27-minute version, and Mark Lewison was trying to convince him that people actually are interested in it, and it is an important piece of Beatles history. Again, is this just a matter of time before this is released? I think so, probably. Is it probably any different than the 12-minute 35-second Take 2? I don't think so. It's probably just a longer version of the Take 2. But it would still be really cool to hear someday. To end this video, we're going to be talking about a piece of Beatles media that was once considered lost that is now considered found. This is the Beatles Ticket to Ride online game. Ticket to Ride was an online game that was released on the Beatles website in 2001. Now the game is called Ticket to Ride, which is a song off of the Beatles Help album, but it seems like it's more Yellow Submarine themed. I don't think that's a big deal at all. I can see how some Beatles nerds might be like, actually, but it's just an online Beatles game. I don't think that's that big of a deal. What is this game even about? Well, a promo card for the game states, the Beatles are late for a most important gig. They've got their tickets in hand and they're waiting for you, their driver, to get them on a flight to the USA. Maneuver a series of 4 vehicles across the bustling metropolis of Liverpool to find John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Pick them up and take them to Speke Airport, where they'll catch a plane to New York to play a sold-out crowd at Shea Stadium. Do it quickly and they may ask you to come along, but be careful of roadblocks, stalled trucks, and anxious mobs around. Hit too many obstacles and you're back where you started. At some point in time, I'm not quite sure, I couldn't find this information. The game was taken off of the Beatles website, which ultimately made it lost. Before being found, the only things that we had was this screenshot of the game and a couple photos of the promo card that I just read. But on July 30th, 2021, the game file was uploaded to the Flash archive by a user by the name of Simmons. He had sourced the game file through the Beatles website using archive.org, I'm guessing the Wayback Machine. But even though the file was found, the game still wasn't able to be played. But on January 14, 2022, I'm going to read this right because I don't want to get any of the names wrong or anything. A user by the name of Melody Samba 99, along with the help of 2 Spanish users who went by the names of Snorka and Snake, found the game during a search that started in Tony Rodriguez TR's Discord server. They found the game on a Spanish website under the name Beatles Online Game, but the game couldn't be played directly in the browser because it was uploaded in an unconventional Flash format. The user known as Snorka searched the source code and found the DCR file. What that means, I have no idea. I'm not that tech savvy, but the result of whatever that means is that somehow the game is now available to be played and is now available for the public to download on archive.org. Melody Sama 99 provided this gameplay. They got it from a user on the previously mentioned Discord server. I think that's really cool that this game was able to be found. I know a lot of Flash games go missing because the Flash formats are outdated and then they're unable to be played on current computers. I used to play Flash games all the time in the early 2010s on my family computer. I feel like when I've gone back and tried to find some of them, I haven't been able to play them because of that reason. I just think it's really cool that these people put in the work and found this game and made it able to be played. If I was able to find the game on a website, I'd have no idea how to get it to be playable. Shout out to these 3 users for finding the game and making it available to everybody. Not only is this a piece of internet history, it's also a piece of Beatles history. Does it look like the most fun game to play? Not at all, but I think it's really cool that they were able to preserve this piece of Beatles media. Am I ever going to play this game? Probably not, but I do think it's really cool to see what the gameplay looks like. This was my take on some of the Beatles' lost, canceled, unreleased, and found media. I had a lot of fun researching this. I do love lost media. I do love the Beatles. Having them come together for one video was a lot of fun to make. This is also the most research I've done for one video. I feel like a lot of videos I've made in the past have been pretty opinion oriented, and this is one that's rooted in a lot of facts and research. And again, a lot of my research came from not only the Lost Media Wiki entries for these topics, but also the Beatles Bible's website helped me a little bit. And I truly tried my best to put anything I found in these articles into my own words. I didn't just want to rip these articles word for word. So just again, a huge shout out to all the authors on the Lost Media Wiki and the Beatles Bible website pages. Their articles really helped me out with the research for this video. I really appreciate it if you guys like this video, giving it a like, that really helped me out. And also consider subscribing if you want more videos about the Beatles and other music topics. I really enjoyed learning a lot through making this video, so I hope you guys enjoyed and learned a little bit in this video as well. I thank you all so much for watching if anybody is still here, and I just really hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you.